Okay, so welcome to part 2 of this tutorial. In this one we're going to cover completing the CMU walls as well as adding the framing for the floor on the second level. So what I want to do first to complete the CMU walls is actually add my course in. So, you know, if you're doing some other type of like monolithic wall, concrete, rammed earth, whatever the case may be, again, you would add that kind of spacing of like what the formwork leaves behind or something like that, and that should as well kind of help us figure out, you know, how the windows need to line up and stuff like that. So we're going to add that stuff as well right now. Excuse me. So what I want to do first is basically contour these surfaces. I want to add the kind of spacing of my CMU courses in my model so that I can kind of use that to guide like adding windows and stuff like that. Actually, there was one thing, okay, before I get too far in here, I wanted to mention, I don't know if I said this last time, but the other thing that we're going to really pay attention to here is like the size of the things that we're modeling, not just in terms of you know, being appropriate to the scale, but also in terms of like, you know, real materials that we can use to actually make this model. So for example, last time I modeled these walls with I mean, they're 8 inches, or they're to scale 8 inches, right? But if we look at the thickness of them, that's kind of a weird thickness, right? That's not really like a material thickness that we can easily get or use. So what I'm also going to do right now, before I get too far into this, is actually adjust my CMU walls to be the right thickness. Now, I know that sounds annoying to do at this point, but I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that'll be easy for making adjustments like that. So what I need to do, let's see, my wall is 0.333, so the probably closest thing to that is 3/8 of an inch, 0.375. The difference, oops, is that divided by 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move each face of the wall over by that much, 0.021. And it may not seem like a lot, but that kind of precision is really going to help the model come together cleanly. So what I need to do is move each face of this wall by 0.021. So what I'm going to do is hold Control-Shift on the keyboard when I'm in this view, so this angle, and I'm going to click and drag to the right around all the edges that kind of meet that face. So I'm selecting the edge of the my paved layer here. I'm selecting all the edges of my contoured ground plane, as well as the footer and the wall itself. So I basically select a whole bunch of the edges of this geometry. Now I'm going to use the command move. Quite simple. Type in 0.021 and move it over by 0.021. So now I've adjusted all of my geometry by that amount. Did I get that right? This seems too big. That was too big. Okay, let's try it again. Okay. So once again, you're going to hold Control-Shift, click and drag to the right to select things only within the window of your selection. I'm going to type move. I can even actually hold Shift and then hit Tab to lock myself into that direction. And then I'm going to type in 0.021, enter. Okay, there we go, that looks more correct. Now I'll do the same thing on the other side. Oops, hold Control-Shift. I should mention, you know, I don't know exactly how this works if you're on a Mac keyboard. You can also use the command move edge. So then all I have to do is click and drag around the stuff I want to adjust, press enter, point to move from, hit tab, 0.021, enter, and then click. There we go. And now when I measure this wall, oops, should be 3/8 of an inch, or pretty close to it. And now I'm going to do the same here. So you can see in this direction it's a little bit more hairy because we're not quite lined up with where the contours are. So what I actually might do is move it by 0.422 or whatever. So I can also deselect stuff by holding Control. Alright, and move it by 0.442. Okay. So that's now 3/8. Alright. And we're still just about in the window where the contours will be. And then finally I'll do this wall over here. Now this wall doesn't matter quite as much, so I'm just going to move that outside face. So as we go, you're going to see me do this a lot, because it's kind of the best way to... it's kind of the best way to make quick adjustments and be precise. This is rather slow. And then what I probably want to do next also is go back and take a look at my contours on my ground plane, and just make sure that I'm hitting all the right edges. So I'm going to wait a couple of seconds for this to come back. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video real quick. Okay, so now that we're all set up, as I mentioned, the walls are now at a regular dimension. One last thing I wanted to look at was like issues like this, for example, where because we took our contour just barely on the inside of where that slab is, we're not getting the kind of ground plane popping up right where it should be. So once again, I would just fix that by moving the edges. So I can go in here to the inside edges of that surface. I can just use the command move edge, select two edges. I can hold shift and hit tab to constrain myself to ortho, and then move it up just to kind of meet the ground planes there. Okay, so now we're pretty much set up, and I want to go ahead and get into what I talked about in the beginning, which is to make the kind of coursing lines on my CMU walls. So I'm going to go ahead and select all my CMU walls. Actually, yeah, what I might do first here is just go ahead and select one of these. So as I mentioned before as well, I'm going to use this. Let me just turn off those ground contours. I'm going to use this kind of these lines to indicate like where the height of my windows will be, the heights of my doors and stuff like that. There's two windows that are punched out of this wall, a couple windows in that wall, and so on. So what I'm going to do first is actually just make a couple of markers. So if I make a line at the bottom of this wall, I'm going to go ahead and select that line. I'm going to use the command array. So this time I want to array it vertically along the spacing of my CMU wall. So I'll set x to 0, or sorry, x to 1, y to 1, and then for my z dimension, because let's see, how tall is my wall? My wall is 18 feet times 12, oops, 18. All right, divided by 8-inch blocks, so 27 courses. So I'll type in 27 there. Then for the first point, I'm going to click on where my line is currently. And for the second point, I'm going to type in 0.333, which, as we know from before, is the scaled equivalent of 8 inches. and then I'm going to move those lines up and just press enter. So if I type in select last, I'm also going to go ahead and group them. So we should see that the wall is pretty much coming up to the top of where my line was there. I'm actually not sure why it's not exact, but that's okay. And then I'm going to go in here and trace out where these windows are. So I'm going to go back to my CMU layer, and I'm going to use the command box, and I'm just going to outline that window. All right, and then I'll drag it up. So what's nice about this is I can use the kind of spacing of these lines to figure out, like, okay, how high can my window be, and still kind of fit within the module of my brick pattern. Might be a lot, kind of simpler if you have, like a larger module, like concrete formwork or something like that. All right, and then I'm going to move it up to where I think it'll go in the wall. Now I want to do the same over here, so I should mention, so with this wall we're actually going to have an opening here. So I didn't model it before, but there will be a box, or I'm sorry, there will be like a couple of courses of CMU above this wall, because this is a kind of load-bearing situation. The second floor units sit on this structure. So I also need to model, like a couple of courses of CMU. And let me just do it kind of roughly using the plan, and then I'll scale it. So I'm going to go 0.666. That is 2 courses of CMU, or 16 inches at this scale. I'll move it into position. Then I'll use the command scale 1D to set it to 3/8 of an inch, 0.375. There we go. So that's like a concrete bond beam, basically. That would be a couple courses of CMU with concrete and rebar cast inside of it to, create like essentially a beam situation, so that our structure up above is held on top of that beam, as well as like the window framing comes up to meet that beam. We're going to do a similar thing over here. So again, if we switch into wireframe, you can see that this wall here is like a kind of glass sliding door wall. Again, I'm going to use the command box and kind of outline that wall there. And then I'm just going to draw it right up to where that beam is. Oh, and then the other thing that I should mention here, let me just do this window first. So again, I'll use the command box, I'll outline this window, and then I'll pull it up to one of my lines. Actually, I might just pull that one right up here. I want this to be a pretty tall window. And then I could scale 1D from the top to one of my lines. Maybe something like that. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is just kind of Boolean difference these geometries out of the wall. Now, because I scaled my walls up, I also need to scale these guys up, but because I'm just going to Boolean them out, they don't need to be like the exact thickness of the wall. I can just make them deeper than the wall and everything should be fine. Okay, and the last thing that I want to do, so I did draw these windows, with like a certain module in plan, but before I get too far, I'm actually going to draw the horizontal coursing as well, just to kind of make sure that my windows are actually hitting that module. So actually, I'm going to go undo my scaling real quick. All right, and the best way to draw the kind of horizontal coursing is we'll go back to that scored line layer. I'm going to draw a vertical line. Actually, let me just use the command line vertical to make sure. There we go. All right. And let's see. I'm going to make a copy of that line. Or I suppose I could array it all the way up. So again, X direction is set to 1, Y 1, Z is 27 still. And the start point will be the end of the line, end point will be the other end, right? And then press enter. We go select last. All right, so what I'm going to do is deselect every other course. There we go, and then move all those lines over by 0.333. Okay. And then basically, I want to kind of wrap that, so we actually don't need these ones that are going to be underground. But basically I'm going to wrap those series of vertical lines all the way around my wall here. So what I'm also going to do is make a polyline from the start of, actually let me do it at the bottom. So from the start of that line, and then all the way over here. Alright. Actually, you know what? Maybe not do that. Alright. I'm just going to bring these lines across, and then I'll rotate them and do it again, just in case the spacing gets messed up. Alright. So I'm going to use the command array curve, and I'll select one of these horizontal lines. So basically, it's just going to move these set of lines along that path. We can move it a certain number of times, or we can define a spacing. So again, I'm going to use 0.666, which is 16 inches at the scale we're working here. And then I'll just press enter. And you can see it drew my lines all the way out. Now before I do anything else, I'll type in SEL last, select last. And I'm going to go ahead and group all those lines because I don't want to have to be selecting them, you know, one by one, which would be a pain, a huge pain. So what I was indicating earlier is, again, that I want to make sure that these windows are actually lined up with the coursing that I'm going to draw in my model. So actually, before I get too far, I'm actually just going to move this over. I think this is a result of us changing the thickness of those walls. So I'm just going to move it over so it's lined up with the corner, because I think that makes most sense for how much we're showing here. And then I'm going to move these windows so they kind of line up with the coursing as well. Okay. Now, let's see here. I could make a copy of this. Oops. Then I'm going to ungroup it and delete everything except for those first two rows. Okay. I can rotate it 90 degrees. Alright. Let me actually group this. And then I'll move it into position on the corner of my wall. So I turned it so that I can continue kind of wrapping it along these two walls. And then I'll go ahead and draw another line in that direction. Start from the end of the wall and go all the way over here. Alright. Array curve. Select that set of lines and select that path curve we just drew. The distance should already be set. There we go. Select last. Excuse me. Okay, and then I'm going to ungroup it and group it all as one. Let's see here. So we could also let's see here. So again, because we kind of changed the spacing or the size of these walls, what I might do here is just kind of cheat these edges over so that they're really hitting like where the walls come together and so on, and where the corners are. So what I'm going to do is ungroup, and I'll just separate these groups basically. So group them. Oops. Delete those lines in between. And then I'll isolate just to have those two groups ungroup, and then group them separately. Alright, use show to bring everything back. Alright, and then I'll just move this group over to where it should go. And then like we did before, I'm going to line these up with how the spacing should go. This one will just do scale 1D because it's already hitting the end of the wall. Okay, perfect. So, I guess also I could ungroup this, oops, and get rid of everything that's not going to show up there. Okay, delete those lines and delete those lines. Don't want to delete the lines from my plan though. Okay. So now I would actually punch my windows. So I'm going to grab these two. You can either scale 1D and make them deeper, or you can just grab that with the gumball on and kind of stretch them out. Stretch them out. Okay. And then with this wall, I'm going to do a Boolean difference. So I selected the wall first. That's the object I want to subtract from. Then I select the two windows I want to punch out of there. And press enter. Same thing over here. Select the wall. Type Boolean difference. Select the two windows and press enter. There we go. And then, so the reason I wanted to do this first is because now I could also draw my horizontal lines, but we'll do that basically just like what we did in drawing the ground plane. So I'm going to use the command contour. I'm going to start at the base of the wall, draw a line up that defines the direction of my contours, and the distance will be 0.333, 8 inches. There we go. And now those contours are going to wrap perfectly around where my windows are. So that saves me a little bit of work. I'm going to group those lines, and then we'll just go ahead and do that for each of these walls. Contour, oops. Group that. Contour. Group that. Oops, contour. Contour. Group it, and last one. Great, and then I would go back and actually, so I could take these two objects, the lines that define the vertical coursing, just hit isolate. I'll select those lines and ungroup them, and then just get rid of the ones that are not needed. Oops, undo that. Group them. Let's see, this one is not letting it for some reason. Oops. And I should also point out, I'm only drawing these lines on one side of the wall. The reason being, when you laser cut, you're really only going to laser cut on one side of the wall. So it kind of really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to to cut these walls as 2 layers, so I'm just going to leave them as 1, and then contour the, or I'm sorry, score the coursing in on the side that makes sense for the model. Okay, delete those lines, which in this case is like these walls are kind of facing out on this model, and those are the ones that I'm going to keep together. Alright, and then I guess I kind of, so I could copy this group over to this wall. Isolate. Alright, and then I'll show you at the end of this video how to kind of put this together for laser cutting. Okay. Finally, I'm also going to do, so I didn't do this wall. But I believe, let's check our plan here. Okay, so there's a window coming up on the top side, so we'll just wait until later to do the horizontal coursing on that wall. Right, so that defines the kind of walls that form the first floor enclosures and stuff like that. And what we want to do next is begin to develop the framing on our second level. So what I'm going to do here is take my second floor plan. I'm going to line it up. I guess I must have deleted the outline from before. So I'm going to line it up right on top of my first floor plan. Use the command move, constrain it to vertical. And I'm going to go right up to where that, where the bottom of the, or where the top of those walls are on my first floor. And then I'm going to move it actually one more unit up, or one more course up. And what I'm leaving there is the space for our floor framing, which is the other half of what we're going to cover in this video. And I'm going to lock my 2D layers. Excuse me, lock my 2D layers again. Okay. What I'm going to do first is go through and like define where the walls would be for, or I'm sorry, define where the floor would be for my second level. So I'm going to go up here and call this, second level flooring. Okay, and then I'm just going to use command polyline and trace out kind of where my enclosure goes. Let me also turn off the scoring lines so I don't get too many weird snaps. Okay, here we go. And then I'm also actually going to just use my walls below to define where certain edges should go. Oops. So I'm just holding Shift and hitting Tab to constrain my next point to that direction. And then I'm using those walls below, or right here, for example, to keep it lined up with that like structure below. Okay, then I'm gonna go ahead and make a planar surface out of that. Delete the outline. All right. And the next thing I want to do is start to model my framing. So I'm going to make a new layer, call it framing. Make it dark green, whatever color you want. And then basically this is, the whole second floor is kind of lightweight wood frame construction. If we look at the plans, you can see that the volumes, so this dash line, if you look at how the volumes kind of float above each other, There's a kind of lightweight wood framing floor, and then like wall structure that sits, you know, kind of on top of where these walls are below. So if we look right here, for example, the way this volume kind of spans between those two walls, which is this volume here, and you can see below it's hitting that exterior courtyard wall, and then it's hitting that beam that we modeled above the entrance to this volume on the first floor. So it's basically spanning from that wall to that beam. So what we want to do first is model a series of wood members that span between those two edges. Now I am going to turn my, let's see, I'm not 100% sure what the best way will be to figure out the appropriate spacing here, so I'm just going to start somewhere. So I'm going to set that framing layer to current, and I'm going to start by drawing a plane. Actually, before I do that really quick, I'm going to model this flooring thing with a thickness. So I'm going to say, select that floor, offset surface, and I'll give it a thickness. So I'll call this just 1/32 of an inch, 1 by 32, and press enter. And I want to offset it down so that my kind of floor plan is still sitting at the top there. Okay, and then I'm going to draw, so like I said, I'm going to draw a plane. Under my options here, I'll hit vertical. And I'm going to start just by drawing from that edge, so the end of my wall. So I'm holding shift now to keep it straight, hit tab. And then I'm going to go right the way to the middle of my beam. And then I want to draw it straight down. So that's like one of my wood members there. Now I should also mention, okay, before I get too far with this, I'm going to give this guy a thickness. So I'm going to use the command offset again. Make sure that the option, oops, sorry, don't use the command offset, use the command offset surf. So we want the option solid set to yes. I want the option both sides in this case because we just drew basically what's going to become the center of our wood joist. Oops, didn't mean to do that. I want to set to both sides, and like before, the distance is still 1/32 of an inch, but because I'm offsetting to both sides of the surface, I'm going to get something that is 1/16 of an inch in total thickness. All right, so solid yes, both sides yes, distance 1/32, and then press enter. There we go. So there's one of our kind of wood frame elements. So I'm going to move that guy in. So I'm just moving it from the outside edge, hold shift, then tab, and snap to the inside edge of our floor there. And then I'm also going to draw a plane along the vertical edge here. So again, I'll use the command plane, hit vertical. So generally speaking, with your floor framing, I guess I could have drawn this first, but you know, that's the way it goes. So I'm gonna, with your floor framing, you'll usually have like a kind of outside frame, and then the joists will go kind of within that frame. So I'm gonna draw some surfaces around the outside edge here. All right, so then I'll offset this one, because I drew it right on the edge, I'm gonna offset it just inward. So I'll reset the distance to 1/16. Oops, gotta turn off the option for both sides. Oops, that didn't work. Turn it off, there we go. Okay. And so just like before, I can easily edit this guy by selecting the edges. Oops. And move it just in like that so that they're meeting at the corner. Oops. All right, and then I'll copy this one over. Now the other thing that I want to mention, actually, is that you would have a kind of interior framing, but you would also have the kind of cladding that goes around this geometry. And that's going to go to the outside, and it's going to go underneath. It's going to wrap underneath, you know, like where the kind of floor would be exposed. which in this case we're actually just going to do it like between walls, so I'll get to that part later. But okay, so let me then copy this geometry a few times. Again, I'm going to use the command array. If I look, I want to array it in the y direction. I'm also going to, so for x I'll leave that set to 0. For the y direction I'll do like 3 or maybe 4, I'm not sure exactly. For the z direction I'm just set it to 1. And then just like before, I'm going to use the dimension 16 inches, or 0.666. Alright, and then click. Oops, I messed up. So 1, 4, 1, start point, 0.666, enter, and then click, and then right click, right, or press enter. Alright, and so as I was mentioning before, we actually want to make sure that we have a kind of exterior frame that goes all the way around at the edge, at the thickness. So there we go. And actually what I might do instead, because this kind of spacing is arbitrary, right? The fact that we drew the first edge right here, I should have started from that outside edge, that makes more sense. So what I'm going to do instead is just move everything, move all these floor joists over so that it meets the outside edge there, and then I'll just delete this one. So we kind of get a sense of the fact that we're cutting through the geometry right there. We're just seeing that floor framing below. Okay, and then I'm going to go over here as well. So this is kind of a tricky situation. So what we would actually see, all right, let's draw another plane, set it to vertical. So I'm going to go right up to the inside of those existing frame members. So I'm going to start with that. Oh, this is not correct. How did I mess that up? So this wall, or this floor, should actually continue all the way over to here. Okay. And then this existing member is going to come right the way out to there. Alright, and then I'll offset the surface again by 1/16. Just offset it in like that. And then if we go back to our plan and refer to, you know, this unit, so this unit and kind of the flooring here, so we're looking at kind of a section of our model in here, and we're seeing the framing come all the way up to that edge. But I think within the kind of framing, the floor framing for this, because we have, we're kind of spanning across the major walls this way, in this direction, so our wood framing would actually go in the other direction for this part. In other words, we're going to have a bunch of joists that go this way across this part of the floor framing. And again, because we're actually cutting through the floor on either side, we're not really going to see a whole lot of framing that happens, you know, kind of capping it off or anything like that. So we're just going to take this member that I just modeled. Again, I'm going to use the command array, and this time I'm going to move it in the x direction. And not really sure how many we need. I'll just type 30. I'll reset y to 1, z stays at 1. Click any point, and then I'm going to use the same spacing as before. Press enter. Okay. Get rid of those extra ones. Alright. And so that's the kind of wood framing for the geometry moving in that direction. Now, as you can see with this model, because of the way we kind of cut through in section, you know, we're going to have to kind of model this surface as something with a certain thickness, and then kind of glue the framing to it, and so on and so forth, as well as kind of skin it, you know. So like, you know, on the inside, obviously we would probably have at least a layer of cladding on the inside of the wood framing, or on the other side of the wood framing, if not an actual drop ceiling for mechanical systems and stuff like that. So we're gonna clad it on the inside as well. We're gonna treat that kind of as a separate surface. But I also want to point out, you know, that only half the model actually needs to be skinned. So it would make sense at this point to like begin to address that, so we can really, you know, conserve our efforts in modeling, you know, more than we need to. So what I'm going to do, I think, is basically just leave this half exposed and clad this half in this direction, just so we have a kind of simpler, like we'll see, you know, part of the framing here, part of the roof framing of this volume, and that window frame, and then everything else can be clad. So what I'll do right now is I'm just going to select this surface, and I'm going to make it, use the command cut plane. All right, and so if I'm in top view, I can basically click on the midpoint of my kind of existing boundary for my model and draw a line straight out, and the command cut plane will make a surface all the way through, like whatever geometry you select, and it's, you know, it's designed to make a little plane for you to be able to trim it. So I'm actually going to go select that plane that it just created, use the command trim, and click on the surface there. And I can delete it, and I'm also going to take this surface and just hit cap to kind of close up that open edge over there where we trimmed it. Okay, so that basically concludes this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to get into developing the wall framing, and then some of the cladding for like closing up the ceilings, and you know, and then finally we'll do like window framing and stuff like that. All right.